Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Whether or Not podcast, the podcast by weather enthusiasts for weather enthusiasts. I'm your host, Drake, here with my co-host, Colin.
Welcome back to the Whether or Not podcast. I know it's been a little bit of a delay, but we've had some interesting things going on in our lives, and, we have a lot to discuss. So we'll definitely be discussing that in today's episode.
Yeah, today is going to be more of a what have we been up to, and, a discuss of the future, and maybe even some cool hurricane stuff. I don't really know what today is going to bring. We kind of just talk at this point because scripts are for losers, and we're not losers. So let's start off with you, Colin. What has your summer and, what you've been doing since the last time we've recorded this podcast?
Well, since the summer started, I've accepted a position at the Oklahoma Mesonet. So I'm currently a student operator for them. So that's one of the things that I really like to do in my free time is look at data and look at just weather things in general. And so this job has allowed me to explore on that passion and to help the Oklahoma Mesonet with their data retrieval and with their not necessarily their quality assurance per se, but just with keeping it working and troubleshooting all that stuff. And it's something that I've really enjoyed. Elsewise, just been going through the motions of schooling, going through the motions of, the summer weather can be boring sometimes. In Dallas, it actually wasn't too bad this summer. We actually got a few storms here and there, but, since then, and it's just been a lot of hot weather. It's been a lot of dry weather. Oklahoma, actually, Norman I think they went 55 days without recording more than 0.25 inches of rain.
Yeah.
So just, pretty bad drought around here. So there hasn't been too many things to talk about. But we did happen to go on a chase a couple weekends ago.
It would be the moderate risk day, which would be 2 Sundays ago, actually, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So that would be I believe the 12th?
Yeah.
It's something, the 10th.
The 10th, yeah.
It'd be the 10th of October. We were in Roosevelt when that tornado that was pretty large, It was rain-wrapped, though, so nobody really could see it. But we had a pretty successful chase. We chased that all the way kind of back to Norman. But, we didn't get visual on it. But everybody was okay. I don't believe anybody was seriously hurt, which is very good. Good on the meteorologists, for doing a great job of predicting. The NWS did a really good job with that day. Everything verified. I'm sure some people were like, oh, it's a bust, Not big tornado hitting a major population, but I'm really glad because that supercell tracked right over the college campus.
Well, another thing people need to remember is that not every risk is created the same. You can have a moderate risk with little tornado potential, but if the wind and the hail potential is great enough, then it can warrant it. And that's what you see a lot of times. I think people just assume the risk coincides with the tornado probability, but often it's the other way around. Usually, you get the risk before you understand the tornado probabilities, because it's all about what kind of, what are the impacts going to be. More often than not, hail and wind affects a greater amount of people per year than tornadoes do. And that's what we saw with that moderate risk on October 10th. There was a big hailstorm that went through a lot of the state and tracked along with that supercell, and it actually went right through Norman. Thankfully, it wasn't as bad as April 28th of this year, but it still was pretty significant. I know a lot of people who had cars damaged and who had just fixed things from that first hailstorm, and then boom, another one happened. But yeah, I was very impressed with everyone, at least from the forecasting side of that day, because pretty much everything verified.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate, especially the models have been pretty spot on lately too. I know that day we chased, everything went a little linear, a little before it was supposed to, but it had those supercell tracks completely right. Everybody knew that, the Metro was definitely under the gun, and thankfully there was not much with that, damage-wise. We have a record now, though, for tornadoes in the month of October, and that pales, just to show that May was, our spring season was very lackluster.
Right.
And, at least in Oklahoma, but October has, been pretty violent when it comes to tornadoes. I think we're at about 28, and we still have a severe event that may be happening this Tuesday. Looks like more of a wind threat MCS right now, but we know with those MCSs, we always can get those brief QLCS tornadoes.
Well, exactly. And if you kind of look at the setup for Tuesday, we're going to have an upper level trough move across the area. And there's a pretty strong capping inversion that should set itself over Oklahoma throughout most of Tuesday. But as that trough encroaches upon the area, and especially once it crosses over between the panhandles, the cap should erode enough to where storms can fire along the trough and along that front. And the models are pretty much indicating that there's going to be a lot of instability, at least for October's sake. And there's also going to be some pretty strong vertical ascension that's going to be happening along the trough as well. So while an MCS looks most likely, we cannot rule out some discrete cells in front of it, especially if that cap erodes quicker than they think it's going to. And because if you look at temperatures, around the area, it's going to be approaching the mid 80s along the Red River, probably the lower 80s in central Oklahoma, and especially if you look at the Panhandle region, 77 degrees is still plenty.
It's very warm for this time of year.
Yeah, and still plenty for storms to fire off. So I think they're right with having a pretty broad slight risk as of now instead of a more concentrated enhanced risk. But I could seriously see that SPC outlook going relatively enhanced because it's one of those cases, kind of like October 10th, where the MCS is going to be the main threat and the wind and the hail are going to be the main threat. But if you can get some of that vertical ascension to erode the cap and really get some convective inhibition in front of the line, which for all our non-weather people, that means if the storms can happen before the main system, then those storms will be supercells and all modes of severe weather will be possible. So it's just one of those things to keep an eye out on.
Yeah, definitely. And it's going to be a pretty interesting fall and winter to me, I believe. I think that we're going to see a stronger winter severe systems that we're going to see because we're under a La Nina this winter, I believe, and that usually calls for some warmer temperatures, but with the moisture that we've been getting, that can cause, especially because wind shear is a lot higher in the winter, we might see some severe weather events that are kind of, different for this time of year.
Yeah, well, this is actually something that I've been focusing my time on, and I think I can probably elaborate on pretty well, but it's all going to come down to SSW events, which are sudden stratospheric warming events, I think. That's something I just call them SSWs.
That, yeah.
But basically that happens when you go around the poles and it suddenly warms, like a bunch of degrees, within a couple of days. And when that happens, it's something considered blocking. And what blocking is whenever you get a lot of warm air and kind of like a pressure system that sets up over a certain area. So then the polar jet has to go somewhere else. And that's what we saw this February. We had a sudden catastrophic, I forget, we had an SSW event. And that, coupled with some blocking over Greenland and Alaska, forced all the cold air to go down way farther south than normal. And that really got us a lot of the cold weather and the cold snap that we had. So last year was a La Nina winter as well. It wasn't as strong of a La Nina winter as it's forecasted to be this year, but it's one of those things that the outlooks are going to say it's going to be warmer in the south, colder in the north, and it's going to be dry. But that's exactly what they said last winter, and we saw how last winter didn't exactly model that. If anything, if you look at the anomalies, it was actually colder than normal for Texas, Oklahoma, and those parts of the South, and warmer or at normal for everything else, which completely contradicts what they are saying. So, we can just go off of the INSO stuff and say, yeah, it's a La Nina, it's going to be warm in the South, it's going to be dry in the South, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to happen because we're kind of seeing now that blocking and these SSW events can cause more weather to happen, at least more so than the ENSO events can. But yeah, that's one of those things that not to get on too much of a hutch here, but when it comes to climate change, a lot of people just assume, yeah, global warming, everything warms up. But that's not necessarily the case because severe warming in the Arctic forces the cold air to go somewhere else. So that's why we're seeing now that you have a warming of the Arctic and the ability for it to warm quicker actually can cause it to be colder around other parts of the world.
Yeah, and the severe weather and our severe cold weather events have been increasing because of that global warming. And while people are like, oh, you know, it's the whole Earth is going to get warmer, like Colin said, we're actually going to see more cold events, more like they're going to be colder. Like we've seen, I believe, over the last 3 years, we've had two very bad like Arctic polar vortex events. This one even stretching down into Texas, and that caused a lot with the power grid, and that's something that is going to be a lot more common probably in the next couple of years, especially with the warming trends. But that's also going to drive our severe weather too.
Exactly.
Because seeing all these, we've had so many fronts come through, and it's just been severe weather event after severe weather event.
Shortwave after shortwave.
And it's not saying that it's not possible this time of year, because it is very possible, but it is above average at least, because the spring, honestly, for a lot of the Great Plains and Tornado Alley was relatively quiet, except for Texas. Texas is always with it, but
Del Rio's gonna Del Rio.
Del Rio's gonna Del Rio. But we've seen that the northern plains, such as like North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, even Kansas haven't seen the tornadoes that they usually would, and we've seen a lot of those tornado events move east. And right now we're actually tracking a tornado event currently happening throughout Missouri and Illinois right now, and there was recently a tornado emergency put out for that. And for this time of year, we don't usually see such weather events that strong.
Yeah, well, and especially like at night too, because that's one of those things that we've studied, and at least meteorologists have studied, the presence of the Great Plains low-level jet and how that can cause, convection to occur easier at night. But that's never necessarily something that's been applied to the Midwest and something that's been applied to the Deep South. But more often than not, we're seeing that not only do these events happen a little bit more frequently, they're happening into the night as well. I mean, if you looked at the high-risk event that happened in the Deep South, in the Southeast earlier this year, the strongest tornado from that was an EF4 that hit right outside of Atlanta, I think, if I remember correctly.
It was in Noonan, Georgia at around midnight.
In the middle of the night, and it was an EF4. And so it's one of those things that's like, wow, we're not, at least to my knowledge, I mean, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, if they're listening, but to my knowledge, we're seeing more and more of these events happen later at night. And it's the question of, are we seeing patterns shift? Are there patterns with our air that we're seeing shift that are potentially longer than just, this is just a year or two?
Yeah. I'm starting to see that there may just be a pattern that, severe weather is going to be even more common, throughout the entire U.S. rather than, the spring season's going to be really bad, in the Tornado Alley. But it seemed that we've just seen severe weather constantly throughout at least the central to eastern part of the United States constantly this year. We've seen multiple severe weather events in the Northeast where usually we don't have those tornado events.
Yeah, I remember the one happening in New Jersey. It felt like maybe just a month ago.
It's crazy to think that's almost been 2 months.
Really?
That was associated with hurricane, I believe that was Ida.
Was it Ida? Okay.
And it's been, we've seen those tornado events happen multiple times. It hit many areas. We saw Annapolis have a tornado. We saw some parts of New Jersey, significant flooding in New York. And
right.
It's been a very rough, severe weather year, even if, we haven't seen those, tornado reports that, like 2011. Yes, 2011 was a terrible year, but every year has its own bad things that have happened. And we haven't even finished out the year yet. We still have 2 more months, and we're seeing record tornadoes in some states, and we haven't even gotten into the winter yet. And with all the wind shear that is, forecasted, as well as a drier winter that could also be colder than normal, but those significant warmings, there's a lot that's unpredictable that may happen.
Yeah, and you think about, I think back to 2015, December 26th to be exact, in the DFW area, something that I'm pretty familiar with being from there. We had a pretty severe tornado outbreak, in December, which is crazy. And there was an EF3 tornado that went through Rowlett. I know some people who had their houses damaged. And it's one of those things that, severe weather will mostly happen in the spring. And then there's that second severe season, which is pretty much right now in October. But that doesn't mean that that's the only time it can happen. We have seen plenty of events happen all year round. And that's one of those things that we're studying with climate change is, how is climate change affecting those frequencies, because it was pretty clear cut for a while that like the peaks are going to be in May. That's when it's going to be strongest. It's going to happen across the Great Plains region. But now it's like, okay, have the peaks shifted? Are we seeing it where the peak is not as strong in May, but the rest of it's stronger throughout the rest of the year? Are we seeing that? Not necessarily are we having the most tornadoes in the Great Plains anymore? Is Tornado Alley shifting? It's just one of those things that time is going to have to tell. But as we're going farther and farther in the space-time continuum, we're seeing how our effects are potentially changing it. But yeah, I mean, just talking about like the SSW events, I don't know how much validity this has, but I've been seeing some of the 2-month forecasts, for just climate patterns in general with the Climate Prediction Center, and they're predicting an above average chance at a warming event happening for the poles in December. So we could see, kind of the opposite to last year, whereas last year was kind of like a slower start to it, but once it hit February, it really like got into it. This year, it could be a case of it starts off really strong. I mean, I've been looking at some of the GFS models. They're already showing a pretty decent cold front for Oklahoma starting the week of November 1st, throughout that first week of November. I think 4 of the last 5 runs have had some kind of snow event in the Oklahoma Panhandle. So, we could be seeing a quicker start to the winter. Then again, I say that we had an ice storm around this time last year in Oklahoma. So, I mean, who really knows?
The weather has been very curious. I don't really know what word to put to it, but it's been very random.
Yeah.
Like, we have seen October ice storms. We've seen February cold snaps, like cold spells, I guess you could say, that have just been so cold. But it's, you think that, like, that would be crazy, but we've also seen December in some places being around 80 degrees, and it's just, like, I remember, like, as, I'm from North Carolina, we finally had our first, like, cold winter in a while. I remember for a streak, I think 2017 to 2019, that we had, like, some Christmas days that were about 74, 75 degrees, and it's random how we can go from that to, it's 20 degrees outside.
Yeah, it's been atypical for sure. It's almost kind of like there's been some weather god and they've been just having a Scrabble bag. And like whenever you play Scrabble, you just take all the different letters out of it. Well, they're doing that with weather events, so it's 7 at a time. Who knows what you're gonna get? And we've at the same time that we've seen random event after random event, we've also been gifted, or maybe gifted isn't the right word, but given boring weather too. I mean, look at the weather from August 1st to October 1st in Oklahoma. Nothing to talk about. I mean, that's part of the reason we didn't get to this podcast sooner is because we'd sit down and we'd be like, okay, what is there to talk about? Nothing. Hurricanes kind of fizzled out, by the end of August. We've been under a drought. We've been under, lack of precipitation. We've been under just warmer than average temperatures. Like, we're just waiting for something to talk about. Now we finally have some things to talk about, so we're going to be getting back into this, but it's just been very interesting around here.
Yeah, schedules have just been, it's been really weird trying to, talk about, stuff for a podcast when weather's been really lackluster, but now that we're starting to get into the second severe season, getting into winter, it's been really weird because we've seen more severe events when around this time, last year, we were seeing a record number, of hurricanes. And, it's like the tropical weather being lackluster. I think it's been almost 20 days now without a single tropical cyclone. And that is like almost unheard of, especially after the events of last year where...
In the Atlantic.
Atlantic, at least. That, it's weird because last year around this time we were going through the Greek letters and it was expected to at least get to that this year too at the pace, but after Sam it's just completely stopped.
And see, that's the thing that actually where we talk about how things have just changed so much. I mean, you look back in the early 2000s and stuff like that, this year is seen as super active because of just how many names we've had. I mean, we are almost at the auxiliary list, I think, right? Is it the next one supposed to be?
I think there's 3 more because I believe we have to do T. No, I think T.
Teresa,
right? And then V and then W.
Yeah, okay.
And that's, I mean, there's still a chance we get to that, but it's been really quiet. But the bad thing about that is the Gulf has been untouched since August.
Yeah.
And if something was to spin up, it could get pretty serious. But also at the same time, that means there's a lot of moisture.
Right.
And that also affects our severe weather events. And I feel like that's a reason why, all that Gulf air that's still so moist hasn't been touched is driving the amount of severe weather.
Just about any time we get sustained southerly flow here, we assume it's either going to be some pretty big temperature advection or we're going to get some weather. But like that's the crazy thing is that we're talking about it's like, oh yeah, we haven't been having that much tropical weather, but we're almost exhausted with our normal list. Before the last half a decade and stuff like that, exhausting the list had only ever really happened once or twice. You don't exhaust the list very often. I think 2005 is the only time we seriously got into Greek letters, and now it's almost kind of like you expect it to get that far. I mean, you look at 2016 had Matthew, but then 2017 was super active. We had a bunch of pretty strong hurricanes. 2018 was relatively active, even if the only strong one was it
Michael?
No, Michael. Yeah, Michael was strong. Yeah, that's right,
Michael
Florence.
Yeah.
And then 2019 we had Dorian, which got super strong. I guess 2019 would be the outlier because I don't think we got that far that year. But then last year, historic season with how many hurricanes we had. This year, I mean, we didn't really have too many strong ones this year, and thankfully we haven't had any big landfalls. But
besides Ida.
Besides Ida, of course, yeah.
Yeah, it just almost seems like as if Ida was last year, as like the time's been flying.
But we think about that. We kind of expect every year there's going to be a Category 4 or Category 5 impact somewhere, and that's not how it used to be. That's not how we've ever thought of it in the past. I mean, it was if you have a Category 4 or Category 5 impact, that is a rarity. I mean, 2005 was such an outlier. I mean, even having, Ivan in 2004 or Ike in 2008, like those are just like outliers. You don't expect that every single year, but at least we didn't. But now are we? Is that something we should expect every year? Do we expect, not if there's going to be a big hurricane, but when and where's it going to hit? What's going to happen? So that's just questions that we continually have to ask and find out.
And I believe from 2016 to last year, I believe that we had a Category 5 every year. And the only reason that streak has not continued was because I believe it was Iota last year or Ada. It was one of the two. Iota. Was a Category 5 and then was after the season was dropped to a Category 4. So that streak had finally ended. But this year we have also seen some pretty strong fish storms, if that's what I like to call them. I know that those are just storms that stay out in the Atlantic, but those can also drive up rip currents, which are also super dangerous for the coasts.
Exactly.
But
or like islands like Bermuda.
But we've seen a lot of those storms that could be strong, and those peaks. You can't always be exactly sure of those peaks, especially with how far out in the ocean that they are. But it's been a good relief, even though we've had a lot of storms. It's a great relief compared to last year where we had multiple United States landfalls of major hurricanes and so we were so exhausted after last year. It was just storm after storm after storm after storm, and while we still had so many storms this year, we've been lucky to have less impact on the United States. We had our one big hurricane in Ida, and ever since then, we've been able to, recover and, thank God, because Louisiana was hit so hard last year. And for them to, have that chance to, finally get a little bit of a break, that makes me happy.
Yeah, and I know, we didn't get the Category 5 hurricane last year, sure, but with the amount of Category 4 hurricanes we had, I mean, you got Teddy, you got Laura, you have Delta, you have Iota, you have Ada. I know, actually, Delta might not have been a 4, but regardless, all of those, you might as well just add those all up to be a Category 5 anyway, because, those are all going to be destructive. When a hurricane's barreling towards you, it doesn't really matter if it's a Category 3 or Category 5. It's going to be disastrous either way. So, we'll take the little victory where we can get it about not having one. But, it's very... That just kind of shows how insane of a year we had last year when we're saying, we got a break this year, despite the fact that we had, if you look at it, a top 10 active Atlantic on record, Yeah.
And it's just... It's honestly impressive to me how our weather has just been so bizarre. I mean, it's felt like in recent years it's gotten even more like just wild. Like we'll see stuff happen in places that it shouldn't. Like over the summer, the Pacific Northwest was at one of the highest levels it's ever been for heat. I remember, wasn't there like multiple heat deaths
Yeah.
over the summer? Wasn't, I can't remember how hot it got, but remember British Columbia, Canada, Oregon, all those places got the hottest temperatures I think they've ever
Portland
had.
got hit really hard. They got up to 105, which is way hotter than they ever get there. And my aunt lives up in Portland. We actually visited her about 2 weeks after everything happened in the Pacific Northwest. But they were just talking about how insane it was. A lot of places up there don't necessarily have the same kind of air conditioning that places that get up to 105 all the time do. They use different techniques. I forget exactly what it is, but there are different cost-cutting measures they do because they just don't expect there to be such hot temperatures. Portland and Seattle both have a pretty, I wouldn't want to say a bad homeless problem, but they have a homeless problem that's higher than a lot of places in the nation. And it is those populations that get impacted the worst when these things happen, because they're just sitting out there in the heat and there is no relief. And so, these heat waves that we see, I mean, there's a pretty bad heat wave that happened in the UK this year too, to just go away from U.S. things. And so it's we are seeing the peaks and troughs, and it's not necessarily so much that oh God, these things never happen. It's more so just a case of the frequency with which we are having these random events and these record events is so much more. And we're forecasted again to be, we had to think the warmest summer on record, or maybe the warmest spring on record, the warmest something on record again this year. And we're on track to have another top 5 warmest year in climatological history. And things are changing.
And I definitely wanted to go off that, not in the U.S. We've also seen, while they were talking about our lackluster spring, China had multiple tornado outbreaks, and we also saw some, and I believe it was the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia. I don't even know what they are anymore. Czech Republic. But there's just been multiple European and Asian tornado outbreaks this year, and that's also not something that usually happens to them. And the amount of severe weather events happening overseas is, kind of impressive to me as well. That just shows you that weather isn't, just going bizarre in the U.S., but also everywhere else across the world. We're seeing trends that have never happened before, and this is honestly one of the best times to be a meteorologist because we're really going to see, some impressive things that are going to happen, that we get to study, and I want to be able to help that, especially with my new role that I want to take on, doing broadcast meteorology. I want to be able to explain to these people exactly what's going on, because while it's not normal, it's something that has happened before in history. We've seen these times across the world where severe weather events are really bizarre. I remember 2011, I believe that while it was also bizarre here in the U.S., it was also bizarre in a lot of other places as well. And I know where that parallel is coming from, with 2021, but I think it's a new trend that we're going to see is, severe weather expanding everywhere throughout, the world. As much as it's already been there, it's going to be a lot more common.
Yeah, and that's why it's essential for everyone to pay attention to the weather, because it's easy to pay attention when it's the winter and just make sure it's not going to snow, or pay attention in the spring and just be like, oh, am I going to get severe weather? You have to pay attention all year round. I mean, again, just to loop back to what we led this podcast off with, there's a slight risk here in Oklahoma for Tuesday. There is an enhanced risk going on right now in Missouri and Illinois. We're seeing multiple tornado warnings. We've seen a tornado emergency. We've seen considerable damage that I would say, at least preliminarily, has to be EF2 to EF3 in certain places. And then we're seeing it's an enhanced risk today. There's a slight risk on Monday, which is tomorrow, probably the day this will come out, where we have seen, we're seeing a slight risk Tuesday. And so it's we keep seeing severe risks in times that maybe people aren't used to. And you just have to stay weather aware. That's kind of the whole big takeaway from it is, no matter where you're at, weather can happen. I mean, I guess, like, if you're in the Colorado Rockies, like in the mountains, maybe don't worry about severe weather per se. But like, if you are in most population centers, Chicago, New York, LA, even, Dallas, Houston, OKC, Atlanta, every major city you can think of in the United States is going to be affected by weather. And we're seeing now they're going to be affected by more weather. So just have a plan in place, like, think to yourself, if you're listening to this, we've talked about this before, but do you have a severe weather plan? Do you have a severe weather plan that works in October? Do you have a plan in case there's another historic outbreak with, snow and ice? If your family loses power again this winter, what will you do? Can you sustain yourself for 2 days? Can you sustain yourself for 3 days? If there's going to be a heat wave as well in some places, like, do you have a way to solve that? Do you have a way to get external air? Like, it's those things that you can't just think about once you see a forecast. You have to be thinking about year round so you can actually prepare for it. Because, I know that's what hurt a lot of people in Texas is those who were prepared for it were able to make adjustments. But those who weren't, they're the ones who fell victim to hypothermia. They're the ones who fell victim to carbon monoxide leaks and stuff like that. And there's a lot of people who can't protect themselves with that. So, it comes to just making sure that if you are in a place to have a plan, you have one of those plans and be in a place to help those who don't have a plan,
Yeah. And I definitely think that, with like you said, with the amount of weather that we're having, being weather aware is the most important thing.
Exactly.
Like, if you or someone is not educated in weather, take time to, look at your local National Weather Service or, just pay attention to the news every day. They will let you know if something's coming. And it's better to be prepared than to have it happen and say that there was no warning, because there always is warning. There's always that person, even 15 minutes ahead of time, that will let you know, hey, this is coming. You need to take shelter. Like, just always pay attention. Right. I know I say like a lot, but I'm trying to explain, we need to tell everybody you need to be weather aware. It's something that we haven't seen enough of, and it's a problem all to this day. There was a situation, I think, in Alabama where 30 minutes ahead of time, there was even a warning out, and there were still people saying it came without warning. There are those warnings, and people need to go ahead and, actually take heed and pay attention.
Right, and that applies to not even just people who aren't aware of the weather, but people who are aware of the weather, because a lot of times I'll also see people who know a lot about the weather and are pretty, knowledgeable on it, and they'll think, oh, well, because I know how tornadoes work, even if I'm in the polygon, if I'm just like a little bit south of it, I'll be fine. You never know how tornadoes are going to turn. Look at the El Reno tornado in 2013. Look at its tornado path and tell me if that looks like a traditional tornado path or not. Because, heads up, it doesn't. It twists and it turns, sometimes without warning, sometimes without reason. And those are the aspects of meteorology that even the most knowledgeable and illustriously decorated meteorologists in history don't know about. Stuff that we're still researching to this day. So if even they don't know how a tornado is going to move, you certainly don't. And that applies to people who are just happen to be, in a storm's warning path, or those who are even going around and looking for it. Too often we've seen chasers that some that we know, some that we don't, who are continuing to put themselves in really dangerous situations. And we're not, of course, we here at Suscord do chase, of course, but like our mission is to chase safely, to educate people on like the dangers and the I guess the victories that come with chasing, and then also just to warn the public. It's a lot better if we can be on the ground and be like, okay, this is exactly how the storm is moving. Let's try to tell people. Let's try to give people a visual than it is for us to be like, we're gonna clout chase and get as close as we can or add to our tornado counters, because that's not what we're about. We're about trying to make sure people are safe, and so that's why we're calling on everyone to be more weather aware, whether you know or don't, whether or not it pertains to you. But yeah, it's just, that's such an important, aspect to highlight. It's just, you always have to be weather aware.
And I mean, everybody can be someone that, informs people about weather. That's the good thing about, the chaser community. While it does have its bad parts, there are those people that are there to help and to send out warnings, because especially with events like tonight, the only thing you really have is radar and your spotters. You can't really tell if anything's going to come. And that's why we like when trained people are out there, people that understand, how weather works. Because as someone who's chased before and has gotten stuck night chasing, not trying to intentionally, but gotten stuck, it is impossible to see things sometimes. And I feel like recently that we've seen a lot of people, have dangerous things happen, especially with the amount of night tornadoes that we were talking about earlier that are super strong, non-survivable tornadoes. And, we need those spotters on the ground, but that's what those meteorologists are for. And I feel like recently with all these developments and stuff, showing how like people need to be weather aware, but you can't see it. That's why I think we need the need for spotters. And I'm very, happy with how the community is, came around and, been more safe, sure to say. I mean, there are still those, daredevils, but those are people that have been doing it for years, like the trained meteorologists, like, of course, the biggest example is Reed. Nobody's going to stop him from doing what he does, but even he sometimes thinks that, maybe I shouldn't chase this, because,
maybe I shouldn't 100-meter a tornado.
Yeah, I shouldn't 0-meter a tornado tonight, but as long as, you're doing it for the right reasons, you do you.
Exactly, and that's why you need to get your information from the right places, too. The ones that are going to be the most effective for you to stay safe are the ones who care about your safety. If you're trying to get your information, look at the organizations and the websites and the companies who are not doing it for profit, but they're doing it for safety. They're doing it to keep you safe. They're doing it to research. They're doing it for the meteorology side of it. Because too often or not, we've seen, you look at AccuWeather. A lot of times, yeah, sure, AccuWeather might have some of your interests at heart, but you look at those, like, $75, packages that they'll do. Sorry, want to get a phone call?
Yeah, but I'm going to pick up for Colin. Sorry, he just got a phone call. I know. Very unprofessional of us.
Sorry,
I'm joking.
Back.
Okay, Colin's back.
Spam calls. You never know. You never know when mom's calling. But regardless, sorry, going back to what I was saying, like, you never know, what these companies, like, are really doing behind the scenes sometimes. And, like, something I really point to here is, look at the people on the, like, news networks. Look at those who are doing it for your safety, doing it to interrupt coverage. They're not doing it because they want you to not watch The Bachelor. They're doing it for your safety. So if it's a company that's doing news and like doing it for your safety, trust them. They have your back. And also don't trust entertainment websites and entertainment things. When Reed does his storm chasing, he is doing it for entertainment, sure, but there's a reason National Geographic's, Storm Chasers series and stuff like that comes out well after. I mean, I think I just saw an episode just aired with Hurricane Sally and Hurricane Laura, two different episodes with those two from last year, Yeah, they're not trying to warn you about stuff. They're showing you, like, how interesting storms can be. But whenever you have things like, I hate to dog on them, but Fox News just announced their new Fox Weather app, which you have to pre-order, which already should be a red flag. But they're talking about bringing you never-before-seen news coverage of severe storms and stuff like that. And they're an entertainment company. They're not doing it to keep you safe. They're doing it to profit off of you. So don't have that as your trusted source. They might be showcasing this first-of-its-kind 3D radar, but that's not going to save you. What's going to save you is knowing if you're going to be in a tornado warning or not, and having people who are caring about the safety of the people in their region and not the entertainment value it might create.
Yeah, and that's why I'm glad that there are those people out there, that really do just do it for the safety. And, as much as there is a lot of entertainment value in storms. Storms are awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. And you know what? Like, you'll catch me recording every single chase I go on, but if there is an issue that we see, someone needs help, of course, we're not going to just, use their story, as a way for entertainment or their issues. If you're out there chasing and you hear of damage, call off your chase, go help. I mean, I know that there's first responders that are there for that, but they always can use help, especially with everything, that's gone on in our world. It's always better, the more help you get. The community aspect of it is super important. As a former first responder, I definitely know that it's important, that everybody knows how to take care of each other, even if, say, you can't help, always calling and letting people know that, hey, some weather's going to happen today. Just please, keep a lookout, just be safe. That can save lives.
Exactly. And if we end up chasing on Tuesday, we'll be doing that. If we come up to a very, interesting scene, then we will be making sure that people are safe. And that's what's really all about,
It's all about...
Keep saying,
Yeah.
I think you replaced your like with because I was counting. You said it like 8 times back then.
But yeah, I say, filler words a lot, but that's yeah. But wow, I was about to say again. But
it's so hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very hard. But yeah. All right, sorry for the unprofessionalism. It's been a while since we've done this. It's a podcast. It's fun. It's live recorded. It's not edited. Everything you hear here is live recorded, and I'm not going to edit this because that takes a lot of work. The only time I'm going to edit anything is if I have to edit clips together.
We'll be professional when we get paid, it's a profession.
Yeah, we don't get paid to do this. We do this for fun because we want to inform you guys about the weather, but also tell you our weather stories. And that's why we want to get some more guests on here, and I guess we can consider this more of like a season 2, but
it's kind of
season 1, we had Reed on there, we had Donovan, awesome guest, we had Tyler and Sage, talking about our, hurricanes. We want to have more guests on there, so if you see someone that you really want on this podcast, hey, just let us know in the comments. Let us know, we have Instagram, Twitter, at them, let them know, hey, we want to see you on here. We love talking to people about weather, and we love hearing about weather stories. And that's all that it's about here, the Whether or Not podcast.
Exactly. Whether or not you like it. But yeah, so that's just an update on what we've been doing, some of our thoughts on weather, some of our thoughts on the future. We will keep you guys updated with Tuesday's event, and hopefully we'll be making this a weekly podcast again. Just depends on our schedules. We're busy people. We got Halloween coming up. We have plans, all this weekend. But, we appreciate every time that you listen, and, we appreciate your patience. It's been a while getting back to this, but, we appreciate every viewer, whether it's 1 or 100.
All right. Well, that's going to be all for today. If you want to hear more from us, our channel is going to be linked in the description of our podcast on Apple and on... I believe what's the other? I don't remember.
We're on Spotify.
We're on everything at this point, but
Anchor.
Yeah, we're on Anchor as well. But I'm gonna do that. Also, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at SuscoreWX. We have all of our latest storm chasing adventures, and we're gonna be posting more on YouTube. I don't know if I want to put all these videos separately, so I might do a best of 2021. That's a little preview for all the people who made it this far. And if you made it this far, drop a like, subscribe, and, put in the comments, your favorite memory from weather. And you know what? We're going to put those in our video next week, our podcast at least, and, talk about, our favorite memories of weather.
Yes, and if you don't leave any comments, we will just put sad faces all over our videos.
Yes, and all you're going to see in the next video for your visualizer is just going to be people crying in the background.
It's going to be so sad.
It's going to be so sad.
No one's going to like it.
A Greek tragedy, to say the least.
We will throw away our view count just for spite.
we will literally cry. But, if you want to see that hour long of us crying on a podcast, make sure to drop a like. Anyways, that's all for today. This is Drake.
This is Colin.
And we will see you guys next time. Bye.